The Book of Boba Fett, or as I call it, The Mandalorian Season 2.5, brought us one of the most important moments in Grogu's character development. Season 2 of The Mandalorian tasked Din Djarin with returning Grogu to his kind, the Jedi, on an adventure that would see him meet the likes of Boba Fett, Bo-Katan, and Ahsoka Tano before handing Grogu to Luke Skywalker in the season's finale. In the timeline we know, Grogu trains under Luke for an undisclosed amount of time. It could be days, weeks, months, we're not entirely sure. In the Book of Boba, we see Luke help Grogu remember the past, specifically the events of Order 66. Luke tells him about the Force and about Yoda. He and Ahsoka observe and debate how much Grogu's heart is really in his training. The Mandalorian visits, delivering a pouch containing some chainmail Beskar armor. Luke then gives Grogu a choice. Take the lightsaber, which once belonged to one of his teachers, Grandmaster Yoda, then becoming Luke's very first student at his new Jedi Academy. His other option, take the chainmail armor and return to Din Djarin as a Mandalorian foundling. In what many fans, myself included, feel to be a rushed outcome, Grogu returns to Din during the finale of the Book of Boba, and will continue his journey alongside Din come The Mandalorian Season 3 in just a few months. But what if Grogu actually chose the lightsaber and remained with Luke Skywalker in the Book of Boba Fett? That's the question we'll be asking today in our first ever What If Theory video. That being said, if you do enjoy the video, drop a like and hit subscribe to let us know that you'd like to see more of these types of videos in the future. Now we do have to drop a bit of a disclaimer. This video is being produced prior to the events of The Mandalorian Season 3. We've only had one teaser trailer so far. That means Grogu, Mando, Luke, and the other story is largely unwritten, at least in canon. If you're watching this after Season 3 drops, there's probably going to be quite a few contradictions. With that out of the way, let's get going. When we look at the factors of Grogu's choice, there's really no surprise how he chose to reunite with Din. Although he had spent a good at least 15 years of his life with the Jedi leading up to Order 66, if you didn't know, Grogu was born in 41 BBY, the same year as Anakin Skywalker. However, as we learn, a lot of those memories of his time with the Jedi have been repressed in his mind. Someone saved Grogu from the temple, and then it's pretty much dark from then on until he's rescued by Mando. I think the decision which Grogu had to make between the lightsaber and armor was a no-brainer for him, and I would place that blame on Luke Skywalker. Before we can get to Grogu's decision, we need to have it presented to him in a different way. One thing that really didn't make sense to me about the way Luke went about things was how much he rejected Grogu having an attachment to the Mandalorian. Luke was often motivated by attachment himself, such as when he left Dagobah to rescue Han and Leia in The Empire Strikes Back. In Legends material, which we have to stress the fact that Legends Luke is very different from canon Luke. Yes, the sequels are canon right now, whether you or I like them or not. Where was I? In Legends material, Luke learns from the failures of the old Jedi Order and is far more open to allowing students at his academy to form attachments. He even takes on a wife, Mara Jade, who was an ex-Darkseid user as the Emperor's hand. I mean, in canon, he did attempt to train Leia, who was in a relationship and having children with Han Solo. In our timeline, before Luke even offers Grogu the armor or lightsaber, he talks with Ahsoka, like he did in the Book of Boba Fett. But then Luke seeks counsel with the Force ghosts of Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and his father, Anakin Skywalker. Yoda, who once served as the Grand Master of the old Jedi Order, would explain to Luke how their devotion to tradition and strict rules allowed the Sith to take power right under their noses. He would also be able to tell Luke of Grogu's training at the Jedi Temple and how his future was of the utmost importance. Obi-Wan would tell Luke about Pre Vizsla, about how he wielded the Darksaber, a lightsaber which was constructed by the first Mandalorian Jedi, Tar Vizsla. Anakin would explain to Luke how he kept the attachment to his mother Padme a secret, and how it became one of the many ways Darth Sidious manipulated him into turning to the dark side. From this, Luke would realize that Grogu's attachment to the Mandalorian didn't necessarily need to be forbidden, that in his Jedi Order, his students would be allowed to form attachments with others. His first course of action would be to help Grogu remember, and in turn, he himself learn about his training at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Rather than traumatizing Grogu with memories of Order 66 and darker times, He'd take him back to the times when he'd been trained by great Jedi masters like Yoda, Mace Windu, and other high-ranking members of the Jedi Council. He'd then sit down with Grogu, much like he did in the show. Maybe this time he'd even bring along a Force Ghost Yoda. Luke would give Grogu the choice he did in the timeline we know, but in a slightly different way. He would just give him the chainmail Beskar shirt and allow Grogu to keep this as a memento to his time as a Mandalorian foundling with Clan Mudhorn. That's when the lightsaber comes out. Luke shows off the blade which once belonged to Yoda, explaining its significance. Grogu, having now remembered Yoda, is far more intrigued by the weapon. That's when the real choice is presented. Grogu can take the blade and become Luke's first student at his new Jedi Academy, or forego his Jedi training and be returned to the Mandalorian. Instead of telling Grogu he'll never see Din again if he does stay, he instead offers Grogu the option to become a Mandalorian Jedi, like Tar Vizsla once was. Luke will teach him the ways of the Force, while he'll still have the opportunity to spend time with Din periodically to learn the ways of Mandalore. Just like in the Book of Boba Fett, the credits roll before we see Grogu's final decision. The Book of Boba Fett finale plays out mostly the same, with Mando, Boba, Fennec, Chrysanthemum, and the others engaging in a war with the Pike Syndicate and Cad Bane, only Grogu does not show up. Obviously, if you've clicked on the video, you know that he's chosen the lightsaber and to be trained by Luke Skywalker, becoming the first Mandalorian Jedi. While it would be super cool to have Luke and Grogu both show up with lightsabers in hand to save the day, like Luke did with the Dark Troopers, we can't have him be a godlike get-out-of-jail-free card. Instead of Grogu taming the Rancor, Boba is able to get him under control after defeating Cad Bane in a preferably longer fight scene. Bane really should have had more screen time, and I honestly wouldn't have minded if he did survive. Obviously, Grogu also saves Din's life at one point with the overgrown droidekas. For our story's sake, we'll just say he uses his jetpack to get out of harm's way. I don't think I'm alone in saying Din and Grogu reuniting in the Book of Boba Fett was a rushed decision that would be best served to have been put off to The Mandalorian Season 3. So that's what we're gonna do. Now this is where things kinda get difficult. As we mentioned off the top, Season 3 hasn't happened yet. We don't know what's in store for Din, Grogu, or any of the other characters. It looks like we'll be meeting a bunch more Mandalorians, and Din will clash with Bo-Katan over the Mandalorian throne. He will more than likely end up as ruler of a united Mandalore, and if leaks are to be believed, there will be another antagonist, possibly Moff Gideon, in his own Mandalorian armor. As for Grogu, in our timeline, he begins his Jedi training. With the events of The Mandalorian taking place 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi, Grogu is probably the first person Luke has attempted to train, other than his sister Leia. We learned of this in a Rise of Skywalker flashback scene. The reason Leia stopped her Jedi training was because she foresaw the death of her son, the future Kylo Ren. At the time of The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, Ben Solo is around 4 years old. He's 29 in The Force Awakens, which is 30 years after the Return of the Jedi. It's hard to say how young Luke may have begun to train him, but for the purposes of the story, we'll say Grogu gets a couple of years of training on his own before Ben is brought to the Academy. Grogu and Ben Solo then train alongside one another for over a decade, becoming very close friends as Luke's two most gifted and important students. Grogu also goes on frequent excursions to Mandalore with Din Djarin, even getting his own full set of Mandalorian armor. As we know, things can't stay happy and good forever because, well,
somehow Palpatine returned.
The dark side has to rise again. The real question to be had here is, does Palpatine, through Snoke, still target Ben Solo to be his future apprentice? Maybe he goes straight for Grogu. Perhaps they realize the bond which Ben and Grogu have formed is too strong and decide to snatch up a young Rey, training her to be the Empress and true villain come the timeline of the sequel trilogy, and before Luke Skywalker gets to her. Let us know which option sounds most intriguing to you. It's hard to say just how strong Grogu could be at this time. He's 50 years old in The Mandalorian and is basically an infant. The only older members of his species we've seen are so much older, Yoda being between 850 and 900 throughout the films, and Yaddle being around 480 years old in Tales of the Jedi. By the time of the sequels, Grogu could be a defenseless child and easy target. but for the sake of storytelling, we'll have to say that he ages fast enough, and all of those years of training under Luke and Din turn him into a very skilled Mandalorian Jedi. No matter who the threat is come the sequels, Kylo Ren, a Dark Rey, or Palpatine himself, Grogu will aid in that conflict, having survived the destruction of Luke's temple. Whether he escapes, Luke saves him, or he's off-world doing Mandalorian things, he's definitely not dying at the hands of Kylo Ren, or Rey, or Palpatine, or whoever that villain is we decided on earlier. No matter what though, Grogu's destiny lies with the Darksaber. Either he takes on Din in a friendly passing of the throne-esque duel, or takes the saber from whoever took it from Din. Maybe a First Order-backed descendant of Gar Saxon, Paz Vizsla, or Moff Gideon. No matter what, our story ends with the Mandalorian Jedi Grogu wielding the Darksaber on the Mandalorian throne. But that does it for today's What If video. If you did enjoy, drop a like on the video and hit subscribe. We'd love to hear any future What If video suggestions in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you. Red 5, standing by.